Live.
It's Monday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster.
AI isn't something sort of the future over the next hill. It's the present. It's already here.
The Prime Minister says the UK can become an AI powerhouse. But what are the risks? We'll hear from an opera singer who's concerned about what artificial intelligence could do to the music industry. The Chancellor's been in China trying to drum up business, but will increased borrowing costs force her to make cuts to government spending?
Achieving weight loss can prevent a lot of the complications and ultimately save the NHS a lot of money.
We cannot afford to treat several million people within the UK with these drugs. It would simply bankrupt the NHS.
Can the NHS afford to provide obesity wonder drugs, or can it afford not to?
I release factors.
And should state school pupils continue to be given the opportunity to learn Latin? Joining us today, Labour MP Sarah Smith, Conservative MP Damien Hines, Deputy Political Editor of The Guardian Jess Elgott, and the London editor of The Times, Andy Sylvester. This is Politics Live. Let's start the programme talking about Latin in state schools and funding for some pupils to continue learning it. We have a headline talking about the issue, but the question mainly is that 8,000 pupils across 40 non-selective schools will be affected if that funding is cut. That wasn't the right headline. We'll see if we can find it for you. It is, there it is. State school pupils in England may have to drop GCSE Latin after funding pulled. The Department of Education urged to delay ending funding of popular programmes so that hundreds of students can complete their courses. It is all part, though, of a cost-cutting drive to stabilise the public finances. Various people have written to The Guardian to complain about the decision. My opening question to you all is, should state schools still receive funding for teaching Latin? Sarah.
So I think what's really important is that obviously we're currently underway with the independent review of the curriculum and assessment and looking at how we deliver the most ambitious and aspirational curriculum for every single child across the country. Within this programme itself, obviously it was benefiting a more limited number of pupils. And I think what we've got to do is keep focusing on every single student having the best opportunity, the best teachers in their schools, and the schools rebuilding programme that we've committed to. And, you know, this is not saying that children can't learn Latin by any stretch, but there are difficult decisions to be made to make sure that every child has the best possible education. A third of children right now leave our education system without a basic GCSE in English and maths. That is an absolute catastrophe and it has to change. And that's what we're focused on as a government.
Does that persuade you, Damien, that funding for some pupils to study Latin should stop?
Of course it shouldn't stop. And to be clear, this is funding that funds training for teachers, resources and curriculum development, and it gives an opportunity to kids in certain state schools, many of them recipients of free school meals, many of those schools in deprived areas, gives them an opportunity to get on a similar footing with children from much more advantaged backgrounds. Having Latin available in these state schools is not elitist, it is the opposite of elitist. It is what enables, you know, a lot of private schools, so many of them offer Latin as an option, relatively few state schools. There is a reason why private schools offer it, because it is something which opens other doors to the worlds of art and archaeology, of course, classical civilization, philosophy and so much else. And that should not be the preserve of children who can afford to go to private schools.
Compelling argument, Sarah.
It's not just Latin that opens those doors. It is access to a holistic curriculum. It's all the skills you develop through sport, through access to the arts, through better music and the music programme we've already announced. So, you know, this is where the focus has to be for every single child across the country and not just a limited number, which is what this programme was specifically benefiting, and making sure that, you know, if it comes forward with this independent review, that Latin should be back on the curriculum for every child. That's what the government will be focused on. It's about the evidence for the implementation and the curriculum that will make the biggest difference to the largest number of students.
Should state schools still receive funding in order for some of their students to continue studying Latin?
You can see why, when a government has got to make very, very tough choices and departments are being squeezed and we hear of more spending cuts to come, that this is the kind of programme that benefits a narrow number of pupils. And that's not because fewer people want to take Latin, it's that this programme is specifically designed only for a certain kind of pupil. So
Although
not
is there a broad demand, do you think, from state school pupils or pupils generally to study Latin?
I haven't heard a clamour for it, but the arguments that Damien makes are quite compelling. You know, that it helps, that it's something that private school pupils have access to that state school pupils don't, that it opens doors when it comes to the building blocks of learning other languages, to how to understand various pieces of arts and so on. So I don't think anyone should dismiss it as something that's just archaic and out of date. And one thing that I feel is particularly compelling about the arguments the people make in The Guardian is that, people are midway through a GCSE.
Yeah, there's
or
a practical...
it. And I think that there's a strong argument there that those who are taking it should at least be allowed to continue it.
Are you a fan of Latin in school generally, and certainly funding for state school pupils?
I mean, from memory of my South London boys' school, agricultural Anglo-Saxon was more popular than Latin. But the points that have been made are completely compelling. And you do look around London's art scene and the museum world, and it's not the most diverse part of our working environment. And it is difficult to look at removing funding for something like this and say that we will have more diverse industries, more diverse creative industries down the line. It is a door opener, and by the nature of removing funding for a door opener, you are closing doors.
I mean, in terms of the savings that are going to be made, I don't know how much will actually be saved, but is it something that you would like to see perhaps revisited in the future if economic circumstances allowed?
What I really want to see, genuinely, and I think, is that every child, every school is offering a diverse curriculum as well as the sort of extracurricular activities that private school students benefit from, because we know it's that holistic piece that develops the resilience, the team building, the leadership skills, on all those critical building blocks that our children need to be able to succeed in the future, particularly when we come into speaking about AI and the future of work. It becomes even more important that those social, emotional skills are what's focused on throughout the education system, as well as the individual subjects that they can.
Well, you've raised the topic of artificial intelligence, and the Prime Minister Keir Starmer has just finished giving a keynote speech on the issue. Let's have a listen.
AI is the way. It's to secure growth, to raise living standards, put money in people's pockets, create exciting new companies, and transform our public services. We're all proud of our history. The first industrial nation, the cradle of engineering innovation. And I want people to look back on this generation and be proud of what we started today.
Andy, can the UK become an AI powerhouse?
Already sort of is, particularly in London, particularly when you look against European competitors. We think about the East Coast and the West Coast of the United States, but London's home to DeepMind, you've got the UCL AI labs, you've got the Turing Institute. There is stuff already happening. I think what most investors in artificial intelligence, what most of the real visionaries want, is a clear sort of playing field of what they can do and what they're allowed to do going forward, because that's sort of where people are making decisions now. Is there regulatory certainty? Do I know that if I invest today that in 5 years' time nothing will change and whatever we're developing today will be allowed to go to market? So if the government can get ahead of that, then that would be great. The problem is artificial intelligence innovation is moving so fast that whenever government gets involved, the nature of the slow decision-making that tends to filter down through Whitehall means that AI is often moving too fast.
And one of the things about us becoming this AI superpower is that lots of the challenges that face the AI industry are the same across lots of different sectors when it comes to growth. Whether it's can get planning permission for a data centre, can the national grid, get the right connections to it? I mean, do we have to build these mini nuclear reactors in order to power this? Is incredibly energy intensive. So actually, is the infrastructure of the country fit to support us becoming this superpower? And it's incredibly intensive for that.
Right. Well, just sort of reflecting some of what you've both said in the Times headline, Tony Blair and William Hague, both former leaders, I should say, of parties. Our focus on AI must be relentless. I mean, Damien, Whitehall getting in the way? This government is criticising the last Conservative government for being too cautious over AI and the regulatory framework.
Look, I agree with what everything Andy and Jess just said, and indeed I agree with what we just heard from the Prime Minister. But look, AI is going to happen anyway. There isn't a decision to be made about let's do AI. AI is happening all over the world. The question is how we make the most of it. Most of that, by the way, will not be down to governments. Most of it will come from private sector firms, from innovators, from academics, from entrepreneurs. The bit the government really has to worry about most is all about the ethical side of it, the privacy questions, the security questions, the safety questions.
Well, how do you feel about that?
And so we have to have a whole a framework which does do those things, but doesn't stifle industry. And there are worries about how, the speed at which Whitehall thinks and does compared to the speed at which a tech entrepreneur thinks and does. And we are going to have a change in mindset, a shift in gear from government to be able to cope with these issues, let alone make the most of them.
Right, but do you agree then with Tony Blair and William Hague, who say in that article that the usual processes, the obstacles, I think they call them, of some of the sort of Treasury cases that usually have to be made, they should just be pushed aside?
They need to change. You can't. When it comes to governance, I'm afraid all of us were involved in different ways in the the industry of democracy and accountability. You can't get rid of governance, but it will have to change to be more fleet of foot, to be more effective.
What about, though, the trade-offs between security and privacy? Things people are genuinely worried about. How do you get that balance right?
I think that, obviously what the government have done is they've had Matt Clifford, this tech entrepreneur, leading on this, identified 50 recommendations that the government are now taking forward. And it's about, moving at pace, but bringing the right experts into the room to guide and make sure we get these calls right. We're currently still struggling with the existing technologies that we have and the impact on our children, and obviously, more coming forward. That was started from the previous government, actually, around online safety. So there's a lot of concerns with our existing technology as well as what's coming down the line, but it's going to come. So we have to tackle this and we have to be serious about it. And I think today's announcement makes that clear, that we are serious about it. And it also came alongside £14 billion of investment by 3 big firms making, commitments to these data centres getting built. But exactly, we cannot move fast enough in terms of not just the reforms and the legislation we need around AI specifically, but all the enablers that will actually enable this growth and this to be an even bigger industry for us going forward.
Right, but I mean, there is a danger in not taking the risks seriously enough too. I mean, it was only 2023, I think we had those pretty apocalyptic warnings from some of the heads of the big tech companies, and they should know, shouldn't they, saying artificial intelligence could lead to the extinction of humanity. Have we just sort of moved away from that?
Well, it seems we're focused on the opportunities, I think would be the Whitehall speak. There are clearly risks, but it's almost impossible to talk about artificial intelligence as one thing. We're going to hear, as we know, from a content creator who can be mimicked by artificial intelligence. That sounds bad. We aren't necessarily hearing from somebody who can plug a load of NHS data into a supercomputer and pop out better outcomes. So it's the applications of this technology which is going to be the things that really touch us on a daily basis. How you legislate that in Whitehall in one thing, I just think it's really difficult.
Well, on this, The Times, tech firms can mine NHS archives in bid to fuel AI revolution. Should we be worried about that?
I think it's an extraordinary thing to read when only a few years ago we were having rows about data selling in the NHS, but I think there has been, and I think since COVID, the NHS getting into such a terrible state that people now sort of I think the public mood might be a bit more open to sacrificing some privacy in order to get the NHS to work better, to not duplicate works, the slowing down of data sharing between, anyone who's ever had a relative in hospital recently will know that getting the data shared between different parts of the NHS and getting different solutions to getting it to collaborate is so difficult. And I think people experiencing that more and more will mean people are a bit more open to sacrificing that freedom.
I mean, is that reflected in what your constituents say to you, or are they more worried about their health data being open to AI?
I don't want to try and speak for both of us, but I'm guessing neither of us get a lot of mail from constituents about AI and data mining. Perhaps in the future we might get.
Oh, you don't? So
we might get more. Look, there is definitely an opportunity with big data in healthcare, and not just in this country, but around the world. And it would be immoral not to make the most of it. But there are also enormous data security and privacy questions, and by the way, morality questions as well about what happens if you can predict that in their 40s or 50s somebody is going to contract a chronic disease, and what does that do to the insurance market? All sorts of questions. And I wouldn't want to change the words of the two great men you had in your headline earlier, but I mean, in many ways, the headline ought to be our approach to AI must be relentlessly balanced between seeing the opportunity and also seeing what the risks are and making sure we get the most. You know, Sarah was talking earlier about social media and some of the other technology we have now. It is not long at all since, you know, Mark Zuckerberg first had the idea of something called the Facebook, and it all sounded very exciting. We had no idea some of the effects that might come from it, and we have to keep that balanced view.
And I think possibly a rare situation where, you know, I think fully agree with what Damien's saying, and I do hope, you know, this will be a I think this has to be a cross-party approach in terms of how we take this legislation forward, and I'm sure that's what, you know, the government will be pushing for. But you know, people don't write to us about, you know, fears for their health data being shared. They write to me much more, and certainly whenever you have a conversation about the NHS, absolutely the issue of, like, it took 3 weeks for my scan to be delivered to the consultant who was, you know, across in the other hospital, and then 3 people have to carry the file up and down the hospital to get the information between 2 departments. People are crying out to see that revolution unlocked, because they see the potential. They can book their Ubers or their food or whatever it is on an app on their phone. And that's what we're committing to. You know, we're moving the NHS at speed to that app-style approach so that people can move appointments, they can see the progress of their treatment plans, etc. But I think, you know, the public are willingly giving up their private data all of the time to these social media companies without even having a moment's thought about it. So to then say that we're not willing to look at how we do this to their advantage and to their genuine benefit seems incredibly, you know, not the right argument to be having.
All right, well, let's have a look at one aspect of the consultation on the great AI debate, and that is the protection of copyright. This headline in The Guardian: UK arts and media reject plan to let AI firms use copyrighted material. This was last month. Coalition of musicians, photographers and newspapers insist existing copyright laws must be respected. Well, let's speak to music producer, singer and composer Juliet Pochin, who joins us from her home studio in Linfield in Sussex. Hello to you. What is your concern, Juliet?
Well, generative AI services are popping up everywhere across our creative industries. They provide an inexpensive but adequate product compared to more expensive processes, which obviously require human creativity. But in order for AI to generate a new piece of music, for example, it needs to be trained using millions of existing human-created recordings. And that is, in fact, the sort of blood, sweat and tears of people like me. We haven't given our permission for our hard work to be used. We haven't been paid for our work to be used. And we're certainly not getting a share of any profits that the AI companies are receiving from using our work. So whilst I really welcome growth, I really welcome new technologies, I do really think we need regulation, because that sounds a little bit like theft as it is at the moment.
Right. Damien, do you sympathise with that? You're on the Culture Committee.
I do sympathise with that. And yes, so I sit on the Culture, Media and Sport Committee, and we'll be looking at this. The government is about to, or perhaps already just has, started a consultation on the copyright issues around this, and particularly this question around, without getting too technical, opt-in versus opt-out. Because these AI models, you know, are built on this massive sort of creative material, and as you rightly say, you haven't necessarily given your permission for that, and there's a question about then
so is it
who benefits. Well, it is a type of theft. Yes, absolutely, and we are going to have some regulation. Exactly where that balance is going to be important, because there will be people crying out from a tech industry perspective, saying, well, we need to have the most amount of material to be able to, for this country to be a leader in these technologies, and that is correct. And there will be other people rightly saying, actually, the creative industries are already a massive industry in this country, and we need people to be fairly remunerated and to be encouraged to develop that sector. Well, they'll be right too.
Well, Juliet, you can mine away at our guest here, since he does sit on the Culture, Media and Sport Committee. What would you like him to say when he is in those meetings?
Well, I would very much like him to say that our copyright law exists to protect people like me. And the big AI companies are often keeping secret where they obtained the data. When I say data, I mean the existing copyrighted music that they have used to train their AI models. And so if these AI companies are forced to be transparent about that, then we can be remunerated for our work and we can have a share of those profits that they're going to receive, which seems only fair.
I think there's an awful lot in what you say, and we've just been through not the same question, but with Spotify and all these different music services, a different thing about how it is fair to remunerate musicians, and it would be better with AI if we got in at a slightly earlier stage in the curve than happened with recorded music in that way.
Sarah?
Yeah, absolutely agree. I think it's about speed. This stuff is moving at pace, and we need to get the regulation ahead of the curve rather than waiting to be behind. And clearly, the creative talents of people need to be fairly protected. And actually, we want to continue to build our creative industries, and so we've got to make sure that these two things sit side by side rather than one sort of dwarfing the other.
Right, but I mean, we heard yesterday Peter Kyle, the Science and Technology Secretary, who wants to liberalise the regime, said it was too cautious under the Conservatives. Isn't that going to be to the detriment, sacrificing people like Juliet in terms of their income and their livelihoods?
I certainly hope that it won't. I think, again, it's about looking at these elements of this legislation like in isolation and making sure that we uphold and make sure that copyright law is embedded within it. But where there are other opportunities and other elements of legislation holding us back, that's the bits that we need to...
Everyone wants a balance where everyone gets something fair. But in reality, which industry is more important, Andy? The creative industries here or AI?
I think this goes back to my further point. I think calling AI an industry is probably where we keep running into difficulty, because it is the applications within the technology that will make a difference. But it's, as alluded to, it's already moving. It's now entirely possible that the next article that Jess writes or that I write will be summarised on a social media platform by artificial intelligence without anyone going anywhere near our website, and therefore bringing some revenue to our news organisations. So unless we're moving quicker, that fleet of foot point that's made, AI bosses are going to be the same as the big tech bosses. If they can do something, they will. So moving faster, getting ahead of that curve is a priority.
Juliet, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just thought that in which case that's why the AI companies should have to, maybe it might be purchasing a license to use my work, but they need to be asking permission. We need to have given consent, and we need to be credited for our work. They're going to do it anyway. I realise the horse has bolted, but they need to maybe have a way of asking our permission, and we have to be giving our consent for our work to be used. And I don't see why that wouldn't be possible, and that we can work alongside these AI companies, these music companies, and have a share in some of the remuneration and some of the profits that they're going to make as a result of using some of our work.
Will AI companies buy that, do you think?
I think that it's, you've got so much material out there on YouTube, or, they're able to train their models on this massive wealth of data that's already out there that people have kind of willingly shared without knowing that this is what was going to be the consequence of that. I think if you'd have thought 20 years ago and thought about what were the kind of things that robots might replace, you never would have said something like opera singers or artists or creatives, but actually that's ended up being some of the professions most at risk. And I think that's possibly caught legislators on the hop, and that's one of the reasons now why, as everyone said, it needs to act more quickly.
Right, but in terms of the share of the proceeds of growth, gosh, who said that a while ago, is that feasible, do you think, Damien, in the way that Juliet's outlined?
Yes. I mean, there are, by the way, of course, in the creative industry, there will always be arguments about exactly what the shares should be, and that's a secondary question. Yeah. There are already, for the phonographic performing rights system and so on, there are ways of making sure that people can share in remuneration, in profit that's made off the back of creativity, and there has to be a system in place. Because, as Juliet rightly said, companies are going to do this anyway. So you need to create some guardrails, create a framework to work within.
Juliet, do you want the final word on this?
Well, I also think that consumers want to know what they are, that they
Yes.
are actually listening to something that was created by a human, that is real human emotion, or is it AI? I do think there's a lot of people who use music and they are wanting to have a human connection, and they might mind if they found out that it was created by AI. It's fine as long as AI declares this is a deep fake, this is AI, this is not actually created by a human being. But I also think the consumer has a right to know what they're listening to.
And will make live music, of course, even more important than ever.
Indeed. Well, on that lovely note, we'll say goodbye to Juliet. Thank you for joining us. Just show you this headline in the Daily Telegraph. We've been talking broadly about where the government is going to find that elusive growth. But anyway, Cabinet told public spending cuts must be ruthless. Chief Secretary to the Treasury says it's crucial we maximise the value of every pound spent. That is in a letter that's been seen by the newspaper sent by Darren Jones. But Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, was asked about this at the press conference after his speech.
In terms of the ruthless approach when it comes to finances and spending, yes, we will be ruthless, as we have been ruthless in the decisions that we've taken so far. We've got clear fiscal rules and we're going to keep to those fiscal rules, and that's why the Chancellor was absolutely right in the words that she chose to describe the approach that we will take.
Ruthless is how the government is going to continue to be when it comes to spending. Sarah, are you ready for a new age of austerity?
This is not about austerity. This is about having responsible public spending. We know that people are frustrated, that there's not the most efficient use of government of their money right now across lots of different public services. They see it, they experience it firsthand. And so what is being required here, ahead of the spending review, is a full review, every penny and every pound being accounted for and justified, and identifying where, for example, there are programmes running with no evidence that they're making an impact, and that those savings are made so that we can spend the money where it's actually going to deliver the best outcomes for the people that depend on these public services.
How difficult it's going to be for MPs, Labour MPs like Sarah, to explain to their constituents when the next round of spending is tight when it comes to public services?
Look, no one stood to be a Labour MP in order to make cuts to public services or to, and especially on things like welfare, where, you know, there's already a feeling, I think, in amongst Labour MPs that they had hoped that the Chancellor might do something like lift the two-child benefit cap, and I think we're going much in the other direction. Welfare seems to be the one, and it's the other one that would be very, very tricky for some Labour MPs to swallow, will be anything to do with public sector pay. But again, I think that if you're going to identify things that are the most likely, that one might also be the one: public sector pay, public sector pensions. But of course, you know, like, it feels like if this government stood for anything at the election, it was about improving public services. That's what people felt like they were voting for, not necessarily just, you know, keeping the books tight, but for improving public services. And unless they can show they can do that, it's going to get Labour MPs starting to feel very difficult.
Absolutely, and I think that's what we're focused on, is actually the reforms that are needed alongside, you know, let's be very clear, we've had the £22 billion investment into the NHS. We are still committed to a 2% increase year on year in public spending. So this is not austerity. This is about making sure that we deliver services that actually work for people. So in Hyndburn, in my constituency, we're going to finally see the rebuild of one of the schools there that's been waiting for decades. And that's going to make a real difference to those children and those families growing up there. And we're doing that time and time again across the country.
The backdrop, though, is that the government is paying more to service its debt. Borrowing costs have gone up quite significantly in the last few weeks, but they've been going up steadily for a variety of reasons. And the government would say more a global issue than particularly a UK issue.
More than in those other countries.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and we'll come on to perhaps the specifics in a moment. But what it means, as Sarah is trying to explain what happened to public services, it'll mean less money for public services, and that's just going to be a fact, isn't it?
Yeah, completely. Look, we're in deck chair rearrangement territory, really, when it comes to the economy. There isn't enough growth for the public services that we currently enjoy, even at the standard that they are right now. So unless you deliver growth, unless you enable the private sector to deliver growth, those public finances figure numbers are not going to get better unless we radically rethink what it is we expect the state, unless we radically lop off large parts of the public sector. With an ageing population, that's just where we're headed. So unless they can deliver growth, and so far, since the Labour government took office, it has not been pro-growth in its messaging, in its policy delivery, and I'm afraid investor sentiment, which was pretty punchy towards the United Kingdom in July, stable government, 5 years, etc., etc. All of that has disappeared.
Sarah?
I don't accept that's all true in terms of, we had £63 billion announced at the investment summit. We've had another £14 billion of investment announced this morning. We know that right now we are, one of the most stable countries for investment compared to what Europe's looking at, and also with lots of uncertainty going on in America right now, whether, the unfunded tax cuts that Trump's committed to and the impact of the tariffs might be. And so, we are continuing to be a country that's attracting that investment, and there are no quick fixes here, and we're starting to outline both how we can speed up the regulatory reform that we know that so many companies and business leaders are calling for, tackling the skills challenges that I hear far more often than anything else when I speak to businesses in my constituency, and getting these public services working, getting the appointments for people in the NHS, which will get them back to work and enable them to take less sick days. All of these things are going to support the plan for growth.
Signed up to that?
Look, we are seeing the consequences of decisions that this government has taken. So, first of all, they talked down the economy, and sentiment really matters in business. Then the Chancellor talked incessantly about how the budget was going to be all about growth, and people like me welcomed that. There was a reasonable expectation it would centre on growth, and then there was basically nothing in it about growth. Indeed, growth forecasts came down as a result of the budget. And then even on top of that, then you had these changes to taxation, which seemed to betray a lack of understanding about how business works, and particularly about how employment decisions work. And that change on employer national insurance contributions, I'm afraid, has really, really shaken business. Has a massive impact on its employment, particularly of part-time workers. And I'm afraid it tends to suggest that the government doesn't think that having historically low unemployment, as it inherited, is an important thing to maintain, and that will in turn affect business confidence, and then I'm afraid you get into a cycle.
We inherited some of the highest rates of people out of work due to their health challenges and not being able to work to their full capacity, and that was one of the challenges that we had to take on. The businesses I spoke to actually obviously thought that actually the NI contributions might be coming in higher than they were in the budget, and so they welcomed that was not.
I think it was the threshold at which it starts. I don't think they were expecting, but anyway.
And I think the plan and the forecasts right now obviously haven't built in the whether it's all based on whether the government actually achieves the reforms needed, particularly in planning, in order to get the 1.5 million homes built. A lot of that hasn't been built into the current forecasts, and so we're still expecting that those could return and could go up again.
But I mean, you say, Damien, that it is because of policy decisions made by Rachel Reeves primarily in the budget at the end of October. Putting that aside, I know we're talking about the counterfactual to some extent, but putting that aside, if the Conservatives had won the election, which they clearly did not, there was a clear message from the electorate, you would be having to make similar spending cuts to public services further down the line, wouldn't you?
Well, first of all, you can't say it's just Rachel Reeves. Don't blame just the Chancellor. I mean, this is the whole government's collective responsibility. It's the Prime Minister and everybody
and the
else.
Answer to my question.
And you're also quite right. We lost the election badly, and we take that with due humility. And of course, we would have to be making difficult decisions. We'd also be held to account for those decisions, but we would not have talked down the economy. We would not have taken an anti-business, anti-employment growth approach. We would have done some difficult things, including, by the way, on working age welfare spending, where we had a plan.
Well, we'll come on to
£12 billion of.
But the IFA, as you know, the Institute for
reductions.
Fiscal Studies said that they weren't actually credible. They said they were difficult in the extreme, is the phrase that they used, to find £12 billion worth of savings from the welfare budget. Do you accept that?
No, I don't. And what we're looking at, both on that and some other measures like on tax evasion and avoidance, if you look back to the pre-COVID era and you just basically say, well, let's just get back to where we were. Same, by the way, you could say about the size of the civil service. These should be achievable gains. And it is right, there are too many people of working age who could work. And, we want, generally speaking, it's good, actually, for many types of health, because it's actually good for your health to go into work, and we do need to have a relentless.
Yeah, but what they were saying is that the savings just weren't there to be made because you'd made these announcements, and a lot of them were in place.
Just like all of the unfunded spending commitments they'd made that we inherited, and we then had to actually found the money to make sure that we could rebuild the schools in my constituency, that we could
the schools capital budget is as it was,
so that we could do the hospitals building plan that has been promised and not delivered. So we could deliver pay rises for teachers and junior doctors, so that we could actually focus in on the reforms that are needed to turn around our public services and get them working again. You left us with prisons overflowing and no commitment to building the prisons that were needed, false spending commitments that meant that the economy was an absolute mess, and no plan for how we're going to tackle on any of the big challenges that are coming down the track, be that, what we're talking about this morning around AI and raising that investment. So I find it very rich getting any criticism from the opposite benches on these issues.
The schools rebuilding programme has carried on as was. But the fundamental issue here is that the Chancellor was right before the budget. It is all about driving economic growth. The problem was that they didn't then follow through in the budget and in everything that's happened since to say we will talk up the economy, we'll improve sentiment, we'll underpin it, and we will do things in our budget and with what every government department does to promote that growth, because fundamentally that is what enables us to afford the excellent public services that we also value.
Well, this is another strategy by the government. I want to ask you two if you think it'll work. The Sunday Times reaves the Chancellor to tell regulators strip back rules to boost growth, attempting to force Whitehall to support the economy. Reeves will call in the heads of Britain's largest regulators to the Treasury on Thursday. Will it work?
It will help, but it's not part of a joined-up. You use the word strategy there, and I think that's probably where the issue lies. To do this at the same time as you're also making it more expensive to hire people, those are not bits of a strategy that fit together.
Do you agree with that? I mean, we've got the Employment Rights Bill. We heard the head of the CBI, the Confederation of British Industry, earlier today on the BBC saying it's the sort of accumulation. It's the increases in NI contributions. It is an increase in the national minimum wage. These may all be the right policies, and the Employment Rights Bill that is making it very different. Is there a sort of accelerator brake issue here with the government?
I think that's been a long-term issue with the way that this government tells a story about what it wants to do about the economy. So those three things feel, in a way, very justifiable policies. Raising the minimum wage is the kind of thing that, if your focus is on living standards, you want to give the lowest paid a pay rise, that feels justifiable. Long-term, the better workers' rights has clearly been something that the UK has lagged behind on, and employee NICs all coming at the same time. I think you get a feeling as a small business that everything's kind of piling on top of you. And I suspect that one of the problems has been that knock to business confidence has been that the only stories that there has been to tell about growth has been these very long-term ones. Changing to planning take a long time. GB Energy, changing the relationship with Europe. All of those feel like a kind of 5 to 10 year product, if we're lucky. And these problems that small businesses are facing are short term.
All right, let's talk about Ozempic, obesity drugs. BBC Panorama have been looking into the new generation of weight loss drugs now available on the NHS. The BBC's medical editor, Fergus Walsh, has been following the progress of patients and speaking to medical experts about what impact the jabs could have and whether the NHS can afford them. Let's have a look.
Naveed Sattar heads the UK government's Obesity Healthcare Goals programme.
The cost of these drugs is still at a level where we cannot afford to treat several million people within the UK with these drugs. It would simply bankrupt the NHS.
He estimates it costs the NHS around £3,000 to give a patient weight loss jabs for a year. And so if everyone eligible got them now, that would be £10 billion a year. Ray is doing well. After 5 months on Wegovy, he's lost 14 kilos, more than 2 stone.
Well, look, I'm really pleased with you. It's clearly doing what it's supposed to do, which is switching off those food noises.
And Ray, who's recently become a granddad, is delighted.
Well pleased. Can't believe it, any of us. My daughters, every time they see me, they said, I'm shrinking or I'm wasting away.
And if you're in the UK, you can watch Panorama, Weight Loss Drugs and the NHS on BBC One tonight at 8, and you can stream it on BBC iPlayer right now. Sarah, can and should the NHS pay for these drugs for anyone who wants them?
So we know that, the cost of tackling obesity is absolutely huge to this country and to the NHS. And so I think it's right that we are looking at this as one of the options. There are a number of pilots and sort of testing strategies being undertaken right now to look at different ways that we can help people with this challenge around their weight in order to improve their health, give them better and higher quality, longer lives. And so I think absolutely, it's a very popular option that people are often currently utilising privately. We should be looking at its efficacy and effectiveness within the NHS in order to take a decision as to how it will be used in the future. So today, I think there's about 280 million currently being spent on that, on that approach, on identifying those that need it the most. And coming back to the previous point around getting people back to working, it's really, really important.
So, we're streeting the Health Secretary. I can't remember exactly how he worded it, but he seemed to say we really should be funding this for everyone who needs it. Obviously, that's a sort of arguable point, but we should be funding it in order to reduce some of the related conditions like type 2 diabetes, no doubt problems with your heart, in order to get people back to work.
Yeah,
is he right?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's why we are currently committing to that 280 million. Yeah, clearly, there are it's a very expensive option, and that's why I don't think it's the only solution that should be looked at. And there's got to be decisions made by far better qualified people than me around to what extent that is rolled out and who we prioritise to receive it.
I mean, should it be rolled out more widely, Damien? I mean, we heard the consultant there saying the NHS can't afford it.
No, it is very expensive treatment. And I think there was a hierarchy of things here that you want. So actually, it starts with, eating properly and exercise, and the things that all of us can do to self-manage. It is also true that some people do get into very difficult situations, and it is also true that the cost of dealing with complications connected to obesity, I think, is something like 11.
So is this the magic cure for all of these problems? Well, just giving Ozempic to everyone?
I'm willing to take a punt that none of us around this table is qualified to say exactly what the optimal number of people to take.
Well, you're right there, but I'm talking from a sort of philosophical point.
I think there is a role for it, but it must never take the place of all those other things. And we do want to go right from a very early age, children in school. We've got health education on the curriculum now. We want children doing sport. We want people walking.
But that's clearly been tried and it's failed when you look at the numbers of people with obesity.
Well, it hasn't. I can't say it's failed.
Well, failed
we're not going to do exercise anymore.
No, but you know what I mean? They obviously feel it's at a level that needs to be...
But there clearly is more that needs to be done, and this is obviously part of the sort of range, part of the suite of interventions.
I mean, it's obviously a growing problem in the UK, and that cannot just be down to the fact that people are not educated enough about what the kinds of food they should eat and whether they should do any exercise. People know what kind of foods they should eat and whether they should exercise. And the reality is that a cheap diet of ultra-processed food for a lot of people means that they start to gain weight without even really realising how much they get this addictive urge to eat, and that's why you've got such an enormous number of people who are overweight. This jab could potentially save the NHS money. But I think there has to be a really, really serious plan about what to do to make sure that people are not on these jabs for life. If you lose the weight,
the problem
then
is
there has to be a proper plan for when you come off these drugs so that you can maintain the gains that are made.
Transformative, potentially?
Clearly transformative. And of course, we're talking about the price of these things right now. What usually happens with emerging technologies is that in 5-10 years' time, it becomes an awful lot cheaper. You start spreading it a little more widely. Somebody else will come along with something that does something similar but cheaper. So we may get to a point where we can have these drugs being given to, as the phrase was, anyone who wants them. I am sceptical of any healthcare system which just dishes stuff out if people ask. Anyone who watches American TV can reflect on the adverts there, and it doesn't strike me as being something that creates a happy nation. But going back, bringing everything together, it all comes back to living standards. The link between obesity and basically a lack of disposable income and cheap diets is there for all to be seen. So, yeah, we need a holistic approach, as discussed, and I guess I'm a little bit worried about these weight jabs just becoming an element of moral hazard, that you don't have to take personal responsibility in this particular space. You can rely at some point on a magic cure, and I think that's just dangerous.
Which side would you come down on then, in terms of holistic, or use this to get quick results?
Completely on holistic, and I think it's important to say that we are focused on bringing the development of these drugs to the UK to be able to bring the cost down over time, because I think it will always be part of the solution. But absolutely, we need to keep educating people. We need to focus on obviously improving living standards, and it's also about just how much time people have to prepare food, to get out and do a daily walk. There's a really strong correlation between having a dog and how much exercise you get because you're more likely to exercise your dog than you are to go to the gym. So, you know...
Everyone get a dog. Is that the New Year resolution? Well, that's all we have time for today. Thank you to all of my guests. I'll be back tomorrow with more Politics Live at 12:15 here on BBC Two and the iPlayer. Have a very good afternoon. Bye-bye.